There are some art packages out there that allow you to use stencils, and in some cases they allow you to create stencils. And stencils can be very good for working with various shapes. They allow you to paint into that shape and to use it to create an image. You can repeat the pattern on your painting and use them a little bit like masks. Rebelle has always had a stencil feature in it, and if you looked at it, you might think that it's very much designed for creating those sorts of shapes and then using them to paint within. What I'd like to show today is some other things that you can do with stencils, how you can use them to create some interesting marks, and then how you can use those marks to introduce random marks and shapes into your painting and to introduce variety and randomness into the way that you work. What we'll do today is to create two or three stencils, and then we'll use those as we create a small still life painting and look to see how that can help introduce interesting and random marks to keep the painting nice and loose and fresh. So let's have a look. My name's Pete. Welcome to Basement Picasso. So today I'm going to do a quick still life painting as part of the stencil demonstration. And to prepare for that, what I did was create a number of still life setups and just took lots of photos of different compositions, different angles, different layouts, to give me a variety of things that I could look at and then choose which image I wanted to work with. If you're interested in trying some of these, what I'll do is I'll leave some of these images available in the link down below. You're very welcome to go and get those. Try one of these yourself and see what you can do. So having all these different images, that allows me to visually look at what sort of composition I want, whether I want sort of horizontal, whether I want something that's a bit more square, and eventually settled on a sort of square format with a couple of nice sort of angles and different colours to work with. So having selected the image that I wanted to work with, I then did a couple of very quick sketches just to get a general sense of the shapes, the shadows and the composition, how the image sort of interacts with the edges as well as the shapes within it. And then I prepared a quick sketch so that I've got something that I'll be able to use as part of the painting process once I get into it. So that was the preparatory material that I've got ready to go. So let's have a look at what we need to do to start the painting. So to begin with today, I'm going to start by creating a new canvas. And because the image that I've selected is going to be a square composition, we'll select a size of, in this case, 1600 by 1600. So the same width as height, and that means that we're going to have a square canvas to be able to work with. I've got a canvas texture. I'm quite happy with the way that looks, so I'll use that one for this particular image. And I'm going to set it up so that it can record, and you'll be able to see some of the time-lapse footage from the painting once we get into it. The first thing we'll do is have a look at the stencil options that you get to begin with. So if we have a look at window Stencils. That will bring up the Stencils panel. And what you should see is under the default, there will be a number of stencils already included. These stencils are effectively black and white images that allow you to paint or not paint. So it's a sort of mask, but it is purely binary. So it's something that will mask out paint and provide you with a shape to control where paint's going. So if we pick one of these shapes, and then you'll see that the stencil appears on the canvas. We can resize it, we can rotate it, we can move it around. One of the items that's quite good, if you click on the menu, one of the ones that I will potentially use, and something that's quite good if you've got sort of smaller shapes on a larger canvas, is if you put the border on, you'll see that you get an extra mask around the outside of the shape, and that's very helpful because it stops your brush marks going outside the overall stencil. So if you don't have that on and you start painting and you accidentally go outside it, then you'll see that your marks will go onto the canvas. And if you put the border on, then that can't happen, and that way you can paint with much bigger, looser strokes without having to worry about where the paint's going. So if we just undo those. So the stencil, you can see with the red, that's the masked area, and we've then got the area that we can paint inside. And that would normally allow us to then come in, pick our paintbrushes, and then we can paint, and that will obviously constrain the shape that we're creating. We can pick different colours and we can paint, blend and mix within that space, and the paint won't go outside of that shape. And that's very good in terms of being able to very quickly sort of paint shapes, paint decorative elements, and just give you a kind of basic sort of painted object. We can hide the mask, the stencil, and then you see that you're left with effectively just the object painted in. And you could obviously use multiple stencils, you could layer them up. There are options that allow you to repeat the stencils, so you can do kind of patterns and all sorts of things. And that's the way people might think about it, is it's very much a sort of object-based mechanism for sort of painting things, and you can do it with thick paint, you can do it with watercolour, etc. What I'd like to show you in this video is something completely different in terms of using a stencil to then create random marks, random shapes, and things of interest that will help to give us a different characteristic within the painting that we're doing. So let's get that set up. So what we've done is clear the layer. So I've got a blank canvas. I've selected black as the colour. And to begin with, I'm just going to use one of the basic oil colours, oil brushes. I'm using the flat brush. So these are just the standard brushes that are included within Rebelle. There's no stencils active. This is just a basic blank canvas. And what I'm going to do is just start making random marks across the image. And what I want to try and do is to make lots of interesting marks, trying to make them random. It can be very difficult at times not to start to make unified, everything equidistant, similar sizes, etc. So trying to come up with something that's genuinely random can be quite challenging, but basically just put some shapes down. We can vary the size. I'm using my loop deck that I did a video on. I'll leave a link in that below. very handy for being able to quickly change brush sizes. And then we'll put a bit of variety in with some larger marks, a few smaller marks. You see I'm trying to leave some gaps so that it's not filling in everything completely. And we're trying to make sure that we've got plenty of directional variability as well, things like that. And we can take some right to the edge as well. There's no problem with filling some of these marks off the side. And that will do. We don't want to overfill the canvas. We just want a random set of marks that we can use. So once we've got that, what we want to do is to make our first stencil from that. So we go back to the stencil panel. We've got our layer currently selected, and I've got a group that I've created, which you can do from the menu by adding a group and then naming it whatever you would like to call your stencils. And with that group selected, what I can then do is click on the menu, and I've got a number of options to be able to create a stencil. So we can do it from image file, we can do it from the layer alpha, the layer image, or from a selection. So in this case, what I want to do is to select the layer alpha, because most of the layer is empty. I've just literally added this selection of strokes. So I can click on that, and what you should hopefully see is immediately we've created the stencil. You can see from the red area how it's selected just slightly larger than all the brush strokes that are actually on the image, and we now have a stencil that we can potentially use. So to show you how that's now going to work, if we go over to the layer palette, and I'll make my original layer hidden. I'll create a new layer just so we can show how that's going to work. And if I just switch off the visibility for a second, pick a colour, and now come in and paint, what you'll see is that the painting is now constrained by those marks, and we're able to paint in a number of random marks and shapes that we've just put down. So that's the general principle of that stencil. And we'll be using this during the course of doing our still life painting. So that's made one set of marks. What I'm now going to do is to make at least one more, possibly two more separate stencils using different styles. So to be able to do that, what we'll do is we will clear that layer, in fact, delete that layer. At the moment, the stencil is still active. So to be able to switch the stencils on and off, there's this little menu in the top right, and we can remove the stencil. That just means remove it from the painting. We're not deleting it from Rebelle. It's still a stencil that we can come back to and use at a later date. So that was the first one. Let's make another one, and we want a different style this time. So what I'm going to use is one of the pens, and we'll use the reed pen. We'll create a new layer for this. Again, we'll make sure that we've got black selected, and then we're going to make some marks. And what I want to do for this is to try and make some quite long, mostly straight, but just with a little bit of natural kind of variance, sort of long, thin marks like that. I can go back and fill them in. It's okay if we've got sort of a couple of extra little marks and things. And then we'll just make a number of strokes like that. Because this is the the reed pens, it will pick up the canvas sort of texture that's sort of sitting below that. So one of the things we want to make sure is that we're not overlapping these. That'll just make it easier to add colours to them when we come back to them later. You'll see that once we get into the painting process. So we want a set of lines that are interesting. They're not too regular. They're not looking too similar, but they've got a little bit of variety, a little bit of angle differences, size differences, length differences, etc. And again, we're not going to do too many of these. It's something we just want to get a little bit of variance and randomness once we kind of bring that in. And again, it's very difficult not to make these regular and equal. It's quite challenging to try and come up with things that really are genuinely random. If you don't like one that goes down, just undo it. See that angle there? It's almost identical to that angle, just because of the natural angle that your arm sort of gravitates to drawing. So feel free, do as much or as little of that as you want. And then once you're happy with it, again, the same thing. We go into the Stencils menu, we click on the menu at the top, and again, we will create a stencil from the alpha. Now you'll see that helpfully these are being called layer 1 and layer 2. We can go in and rename those if we want. So we should be able to double click on that and then just type it in. Unfortunately, every time I click on it, it was creating a new stencil, so we'll go and remove those and we can click remove, or we can right click and then use the backspace key as a quick way to remove them from the canvas. So that gives us some random lines. So let's do another one. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'll use the pencil tool, and I'm just going to make random scribble marks and just random sort of lines, but slightly different to what we did in the last one. So this will be much more just these sorts of things. And you can get creative as you want doing these sorts of things. You can use all the different tools. You could use some of the watercolor things and have some runny sort of dripping sort of shapes. That would be absolutely fine. You can do sort of text. You can sort of handwrite some text, so we could do interesting things. Silly things like that, and just incorporate anything that you want. What I tend to do is with these is sort of keep a general sort of style. So you saw the lines, and the shapes and these sort of scribbles. We'll tend to do these sort of separately, but as I say, you can create whatever you feel like. And part of this is around coming up with things that are your sort of natural marks, things that you're interested in, things that the way that you would sort of sketch or draw or paint or that sort of thing. So that gives us some interesting marks. I think the thing we'll do is we'll make that one a bit bigger, because they're all quite sort of similar. So again, once you're happy with what you've got, then we go back into the stencil menu, and again from this layer we'll create the stencil from the alpha, layer alpha, and again we get a stencil, and we'll go in and call this one Scribbles. So that's a general principle. You can make as few or as many of those stencils, and when it comes to actually doing the painting, we'll then be able to incorporate those into the painting process, and then we'll see how that helps introduce randomness and interesting marks that we can use as we do the painting. So I've set everything up so that we're ready to paint now, and what I've done is brought in my two reference images. So I've got the photo that I chose to work from, and I've also got the line sketch brought in as a reference image. They look very similar, but when I was doing the sketches, if you look closely, there's a few minor adjustments that I've made in terms of some of the angles of the lines, the position of that orange segment, and just a couple of things that were sort of slightly close to each other. So I'll use the sketch in terms of the positioning rather than specifically the photo. But what I would like to do is take some of the colours from the photo that I've got. So to be able to do that, we can click on the eyedropper, and then every time I come over to the photo, that means that I can click on that and get the colour. So what I'll do is pick one of the standard brushes. So we've got the flat acrylic, and set that to a reasonably large size. And what I'm going to do is just very loosely block this in. I'm not going to be trying to draw specific shapes. I really just want to get an overall sort of feel for the colours, and just start to get a sense of how those work together. So I'll do a little bit of colour picking just to pick some of the key colours, and then try and mix them up on the image to effectively make the image the overall palette to begin with. Put the loading down because at the moment, to begin with, I don't want to put huge amounts of thick paint down, so we'll keep the oiliness up, but the loading reasonably low, that way that we're just starting to put colour down without too much texture at this point. We'll make sure that the real pigment mixing is on. It's a feature that's available in the Pro version, and something that really makes the colours mix and blend much more effectively. I'm not going to be necessarily sticking to the exact colours that are in this photo reference. So for example, the sort of paper colour there was a bit lighter than I want to start with, so we'll just use slightly darker colours. We can always make it lighter later on as we start to work with it. The most important colour in this is the real sort of orange colour that we've got within the oranges, and just the way that really sort of contrasts with the blue. That's really one of the sort of key things that we've kind of got in this image, and that's something I want to work on. In the photo, the blue is very much isolated. It is just sitting within that shape, but that's something I want to try and bring out more within the painting as a whole. So we want to try and use that blue just a little bit more around the rest of the image, and we'll see when we bring the stencils in how that helps us carry particular colours around the image very effectively. The stencil marks are very good for being able to get better colour unity across the whole image. So hopefully we can show that once we get to that stage. So you'll notice at this point I'm not drawing. I'm really not concerned about positioning or edges or details or anything of that sort of nature. What we are looking at is just general kind of colour mixing. I often describe this as the stage where we're really just making a palette, not a painting. You know, the details and the edges and all that sort of thing will come at a later stage. So one of the things I quite like, and it's maybe quite subtle and quite hard to see in the reference photo, but there's quite a nice play between cool grey of the white paper and warm grey where the light was coming in and it's reflecting off the orange and the skin underneath, and you're getting a warm cast on the white paper there. So that's something I want to try and bring out and try and emphasise a little bit. Make sure I capture that within the painting. We've got the same thing with the green here in the photo. The green's very isolated in this context within the apple. There's not even really much sort of green coming into the reflection. But what we're seeing with the pigment mixing is there's lots of hints of green already coming through in the image, which is really good. So we're starting to get an orange, blue, green colour palette sort of working across the whole image. And again, that's something I want to reinforce by taking some of the green colouring into other areas of the picture. The other thing is there's a really nice kind of dark shadow where the fruit is kind of casting the shadow. The light's coming in from the left hand side and then casting shadow across the image. So at the moment, I'm not going to take those areas too dark, and we'll see later in the painting, we'll come back and we'll use some of the watercolour to be able to bring those shadows up darker and to interact with the colours that are there. At this point, we can sort of step back from the image a little bit and just look at the colour notes and just the general sort of colour statement that the image is starting to make. And I'm starting to really be quite pleased with a lot of the sort of colours that are coming through, some of the mixing that's going on. There's lots of kind of interesting, subtle colour variations, and these are things that we can start to use as we take the painting forward. So we've covered the canvas as a whole, and we're kind of ready to think about starting to move on to the next stages. Before we do that, first thing I want to do is introduce just a little bit more randomness, so we can start to use some of the stencils that we were working on originally. So if we take the first one, we just click on that and we'll see that kind of puts the stencil across the whole image. And I want to see where the stencil gaps are. So I'll keep the stencil visible while I work. Doesn't quite cover the whole canvas. So as we said, the trick with that is that we can go in and add a border, and that way I know that I won't be painting across that edge and onto the image. So what I'll do is I'll just use the canvas picker, colour picker, and I'll just pick up various colours from underneath and then make this brush slightly thicker, and then what we'll do is just start to paint in those. And what this is doing is just moving colour around the canvas. So you'll see that I pick colour from one area and then just bring it into a completely different area. And it'll look quite messy at this stage when we look at it. But we'll find that this will introduce a lot of interest and randomness to the image and set us up well for the next stage when we start bringing the lines and start to tighten up the drawing. But at this stage, what I'm trying to do is to make sure I'm picking the different colours and then just moving them around the image. What I've also got at the moment on my second monitor is the preview image. If I just bring that down for you to have a look at the moment, what you'll see is in the preview image, as these marks go down, the stencil doesn't show in this, so I can see how these marks are starting to appear on the canvas and make sure that the colours are interesting and working together. So using that in conjunction with the image that I'm working on is really helpful. You could obviously make the stencil hidden, but then of course you need to try and work out where all the marks and gaps are. So at this stage, it's easier to keep the stencil visible and then work on it that way. You can see the brush that I'm using. I've also got the multicoloured brush setting. So it's currently on paint and mix with multicoloured. And you can see what that's doing is it's putting down really interesting strokes with variation. It's blending those colours together and giving us really interesting marks as it does it. So we'll just work around this image, just filling in all those marks, picking out colours that I think look interesting, and then just move them around the image. And we've just got a few more to do. And as we said before, one of the things this helps to do is really unify the image in terms of the colours. So where the photo is really distinct in terms of a blue area and a green area and very distinct oranges, what we end up in the image is something that's really nicely unified and brings those various colours together. So I think we're just about done with this. I think that's most of those shapes filled in. I'm quite pleased with how that's looking. So if we can right click on the stencil and then we can use the menu and then we can remove it. There's a hotkey for that, which is backspace, which we can use as well. So what you should now hopefully see is that we've got lots of interest. You can still see the underlying structure of the image, but what we've added is a whole load of randomness and interest on top of that. And we can carry on doing that. You can do that as many times as you want. We've got the different ones. So if we bring the lines onto it, we'll do the same thing. We'll first of all add a border so we don't paint anywhere accidentally. And we'll just do exactly the same thing again. We'll pick colours and then just paint in those. And this was one of the reasons why we were talking about making sure that each of these was nice and separate, because it makes it much easier to then be able to paint in that particular shape. There's only a few lines there, so that doesn't take too long. And once we're finished, we'll take that one off. And again, you can see how that now adds a bit more randomness and structure, just helps break up the image. And that will do for just now. So a lot of these they're going to get painted over, but just in terms of giving us a starting structure, colours, marks, and surface, this can be a really good way to help make sure that you keep things really loose and fresh at this stage, and not get too caught up with trying to do lots of detail right from the start. So that can help with that. So what I'm going to do now is to bring in the drawing that I created previously. I'll drag that in and then create it as a new layer. And because that was a transparent PNG file, you can see that we've got the lines without any background, which is what I'm looking for. So I'll accept that as a new layer. And then the first thing I want to do is to colour down some of the lines so that they're not all black. And the way that I do that is to select the lines layer, to lock the transparency, and then anything that we paint, we'll be able to paint into those lines. So if I now select a colour and start painting, you'll see that I can put some of these colours into the lines without painting outside of that. So what I'm going to do is just go around and use the various colours from the image to knock some of the black lines down a bit, so they'll still stand out, they'll still be there, I'll still be able to see them, and still be able to paint on top of them, but they won't stand out in quite the same way that the black lines do. So this is the way that I go around and integrate the line work to give me something to draw on. So that allows me to play around with the colours. I can do a little bit of light on dark and a little bit of dark on light, and just get a little bit of natural sort of variation in the colours. And then once I'm happy with that, what we'll do is just merge that down, so we're back to working on a layer. So we'll take the transparency off, and then that layer I will merge down. So we're now back to working on a single layer again. So obviously the underpainting that we did was very loose and rough. We've got lots of interesting colours, but we can see from the kind of line work that a lot of this isn't really sitting in the right place. But what we've now got is that kind of underpainting effectively as our palette, and we can now just start to use that and to start to paint in the image. And what this is going to do is now work with and blend and paint into all these colours that we had already put down. So we get a lot of interesting colours that will start to emerge, and the colours that we're painting in will start to respond to all these colours that we have as part of the underpainting. So we'll go around. What we don't want to get too caught up with is trying not to get too lost in just kind of paint by numbers. We're not sort of filling in all the lines and wanting to get really sort of tight and detailed too quickly. So we want to try and make sure that we don't work with too small a brush, that we're able to try and keep interesting marks and things going. So what we'll do is just for a while focus on the first pass painting and just leverage all the colours on the image, and then just do the next level of painting refinement. So that gives me a first pass refinement. We've got the placement of the objects brought into the line, and we've moved the colours around. So we've got the, the sort of first pass ready to build on. The two things I want to do now are, first of all, to use the stencils to bring back a bit of the looseness and rough marks to just freshen up the surface, because everything's getting quite tight and linear. And then the second thing I'm going to do is to use the watercolours to darken up the shadow area and give more of the sense of depth. So the first thing is the stencils. So we'll use all three of these in turn, and we'll just go through the same process that we did previously. We'll bring the stencil on. We will make sure that the border is on, and then we'll just pick up colours from around the image and move those around into the shapes. We press backspace to take that stencil off. And what you should hopefully immediately see is that really freshens up the whole surface, moves the colours around, and just kind of keeps this conversation going in terms of realistic sort of three-dimensional things versus this surface and the texture and the shapes, and just helps us to keep playing backwards and forwards between the two. And it's also really helped to kind of unify the colours around the image again. So that was the first one. We'll bring on the second one, and again we'll put the border on, and then we'll just do the same thing again. Move some of those colours around, and there's only a few lines to use this time, so it shouldn't take us too long to fill that in. That should do for that one, and backspace to hide it. And then we'll bring in the third one, which was our little scribbles, and that one's covering the canvas, so we don't need to put any extra border around that. And we'll just go around and fill those in. So hit backspace and take that off, and now what we can see is that all those marks, all the lines, all the shapes are now all carrying those different colours around the image, and that we can now continue to work on that. Before we do, we'll bring in a little bit of the shadow. So the way that we'll do that is to use a watercolour brush. I'll use the inks for this, and we'll make sure that in the visual settings we'll put the re-wet down to 0 so the colours don't run. It's quite a high diffusion speed, and take the granulation off for this one. We'll leave everything else as it is. And then what we want to pick is something that will help us unify these colours. I'm going to try a reasonably dark blue to begin with, see what kind of marks that makes. That's working reasonably well, diffusing out. So we'll just make it a bit darker, and then we'll use that to gently paint in the shadows. It's going to run around a bit, it'll go over the edges, it'll interact with the textures. That's absolutely fine. We're just generally using that to darken the colours that are there, interact with them, so it's acting as a wash, and we're still getting hints of the underlying colours that were there coming through. So the blues and the oranges and greens are all kind of combining to give interesting colour combinations as we darken the image up. So I'm not going to mask this or use any stencils or anything like that. This is all just going to get painted in freehand, so it will be fairly quick and loose and rough, but just enough to start to bring the sense of depth into the image. And this is obviously one of the really nice things with Rebelle, the way that the wet media interacts with not just the canvas texture but the thick paint that's there. So if we zoom in and have a look at that, you can see how it's running around those little segments of thick paint. It's blending into the canvas, and it just gives some really nice natural looking texture and marks as that kind of runs around. Not trying to be too fussy about this, so I'm not trying to get any really sort of sharp edges, and just basically wanting to build up the general sense of where the shadows are sitting, and how they're helping to give a bit more sort of convincing sense of the light coming in. And this is obviously painting over some of the marks that we just brought in, and that's absolutely fine. We're just going to keep this process of refining the image, making it more detailed, painting in detail, refining edges, sharpening it up, and then every so often bringing in more sort of random marks and shapes, and just do several rounds of this sort of push and pull of the image between natural kind of realistic shapes and colours versus loose random marks, to see what we end up with. Just giving it a chance for the wet media to run around, to diffuse. I'm not doing anything, not trying to make it sort of drip down or get any of those sorts of effects. Really just looking to darken up and get a sense of the sort of light and shadow. So there's a couple of bits there I want to try and build up a bit more. And one thing you'll notice, I'm keeping the shadow colour all the same. I want to really sort of unify these areas at the moment, so I'm not trying to paint the orange notes of the orange or particular green elements. Some of that's coming through because of the underpainting, but ultimately what I want is to make this whole sort of shadow area feel much more unified. That tends to give an image a much more of a sense of a unity. If you can do that, you can still have a little bit of variance within the shadows, but trying to keep them more unified can really help. So once I'm happy with that, we'll just dry that layer. And what I'm going to do now is just take a little break, come back, look at the image, and then think about what I want to do for the next layer of refinement to build on top of this. So I've had a quick break, come back, looking at the image with fresh eyes, and the sorts of things that stand out to me at the moment are wanting to sort of darken some of the outer edges and outer corners, just kind of vignette the image a little bit. And then really just another layer of working up the image. We've lost a lot of the kind of shapes and edges, so it's really just going to be a process of painting and refining those, trying to keep the marks as big and simple as possible, trying not to get too caught up in detail. But basically we're just going to work around the whole image again and just continue to build it up. So at this point in the painting, I'm getting fairly close to being finished. I think one of the questions that always comes up is, how do you know when a piece is finished? And for me, there's a couple of things. I just get a general sense that I'm feeling reasonably happy with what I've done. I can take a break, go away, come back, look at it, and think I'm reasonably pleased with where something's got to. And if I'm doing a full final production piece, what I would do is literally get a cup of tea, sit down, look at it for 10-15 minutes, and try and work out, is there anything in the image that really stands out, anything that really bugs me, and then try and pick 2 or 3 things to make very specific changes, and then repeat that process. So you know, right at the end, you really slow down. You really start making very specific changes, and then sit back and look to see whether that's improved it or whether there's something to tweak. And hopefully, if you do that, you'll get to the point where you can sit back and decide, yep, that's it. I'm happy enough with that, and call it finished. So we're pretty close with this one. But since we're doing a demonstration about stencils, what I'm going to do is show you the way that I would quite often finish a piece, and right at the end I'll add back in another layer of marks and randomness and shapes and what I would refer to as special effects, basically, to just to add an extra dimension to the image. So what we'll do is we'll use the stencils we created originally, and then I'll show you how we can also use a couple of other things just to finish off the image. So if we go back to the stencils that we created, I think we'll use the lines one just to bring some of those back in. And what we'll do is, first of all, make sure that we've got the border on, and this time we'll make the stencil not visible so that we can really focus on looking at the image. We obviously need to work out where the lines are. So I'll use reasonably thick brush for this one, and again we'll just pick up some of the colours in the image and then look to bring those in, and we'll sort of do it one at a time and just really look to check and see if that is something that I want to leave in. If I'm reasonably happy with it, then we'll move on. And obviously we're picking up some of the lines that were there before, but I'm not necessarily going back in with the same colours. Some of it's around just picking up different colours and seeing what they look like, and using a bit more of the blending and letting some of the underlying colours just come through so that we get a slightly more interesting mark. That's generally working quite well. I'll just the stencil back on so we can see there's a few other lines. Bring those in and checking on the other monitor to see how those are sitting, whether that's something I'm happy with or not. And generally those are sort of working quite well. So if we just hide that one again, then we can have a look at what we've brought in. So now we're being much more careful about making sure that those marks are harmonious with the image and helping to play between the image and the space and not really standing out and looking awkward. So those ones I'm quite comfortable with, and then what we'll go in and do is we'll bring in the other one, and let me just remove all the stencils first of all. Get rid of all of those and bring that one back in. And what I'm going to do this time is actually maybe use this but make some of these marks smaller. So what we'll do is use the menu, we'll make it bordered first of all. Now we can reduce that down a little bit and we can rotate it, and you can see we can rotate it and position it and actually think about where some of those marks are going to go. And I think what I quite like to do is just focus them around more in this sort of top left hand side of things, and then let's paint in some of these. I'm not necessarily going to use absolutely all of these. I'll just use some of them and see how we get on. Some of these I'm using quite similar colours to what's underneath, and what that's really doing is just making a more distinct mark and something that has a bit more texture. So rather than it being a very different colour, which we can use occasionally, it's more about making textures and thickness. Just take that off for a second, show you what that's looking like. You can see some of these marks are coming through, and it's, as I say, really about the thickness. We try some different brushes with these as well. Remember, you can paint on these even if the stencil's hidden, So that can be quite helpful in terms of being able to adjust some of the marks. You put something down that you're not particularly keen on, then you can always just go back in and put another one down. And if you decide that's actually not a shape or a mark you want to use, then you can always just take it out, and that's absolutely fine. The stencils on, have a look at where some of the other marks are sitting. So that's brought through a few more of those shapes, and that's enough. I'm happy with that. So what we'll do is just remove that stencil. So we can just hit backspace to get rid of it. And then what I'm going to do is just add a couple of extra text-based stencils. So something else that you can do within the stencil panel is to use stencils, go to the little menu, and then you can see that we've got other options which are create stencil from image file. So what I'm going to do is bring in a couple of images. So the first one is a sort of text file that I created previously. So when we select the file and click OK, then that'll be added into the stencils, and we can click on that. And again, what you'll see is the black in the image has become the gaps in the stencil, and anything that was white is effectively blocked out. So we'll just add a border to that, and this is a specific bit of text. I want to think a little bit more about where exactly I want to position this. I'm not going to use this multiple times. I'm just going to use this effectively once as a little bit of special effects. And I think we'll maybe try it in this sort of space to begin with. Make it reasonably small. So, I mean, this is all just sort of artistic decisions and a judgment in terms of how that's going to work. So I'll hide the stencil so that you can see what we're doing. And then when I pick up a color, all we're going to be able to paint into is that text that was there, and we can pick up different colors and then paint that text in a way that kind of integrates into the colors of the image. So we can paint a little bit of dark on light, we can paint some light on dark, we can bring through some of the colors, and that's basically all we're trying to do is just integrate that text in as best we can. Make it interesting, make it part of the image, make sure that it's not really standing out and looking too dominant. You know, we don't want something that overwhelms the image, similar to these lines and these marks. What we're trying to do is just at interest, surface, character, and marks and shapes, and that text helps us to do that. So that's one example. I'm not going to do too much of that. That's sitting quite nicely. I'm quite happy with that. So again, we'll go back to the stencils. We'll make that visible, and then we'll just remove that one from the image. And then we'll just do another example. So what I did was, something I quite often do is try and incorporate text that is in some way related to the context of what we're doing. So I went to Wikipedia, looked up still life and got some of the text from that, and then just did a screenshot to get an image. So again, if we go and create a stencil from an image file, and then use that still life text and open that up. So we've got another stencil, and we'll do the same thing. So we'll add that to the painting. Put a border on to make sure I don't paint outside it. Make it slightly bigger, and then we'll rotate it into something that's, and position it in a way that's going to work generally with the image. So I'm thinking of something that's angled, not perfectly in the sort of perspective angle, but something that's relative to those sorts of angles, and we'll put it up there. Slightly bigger. So once you're happy with the positioning, again, I will hide the stencil so that you can see how this is painting into the image. Just save the file before we start, and then again, same sort of thing. We're just going to pick up some of the colours and then just start to bring some of that text into the image, and deciding whether that's working effectively or something that I want to change. I'm not going to do a huge amount of this. I just want enough to bring a little bit of the text through and just help break up some of the underlying shapes and colours. And I think we're just about there. Quite a nice wee still life just in the corner that we'll just add in. Of course, ultimately, this is one of the benefits of working digitally. I do this traditionally. I get some of these sorts of things, and I actually get rubber stamps made up with text, and then you can actually block print it onto the paintings that you're doing. I'll occasionally do that with the images that I'm working on, but digitally, this is of course so much easier to be able to do these sorts of things. So not going to overdo that. I've just brought some of the colours in. They're all sort of blending and mixing, so there's a strong coherence with the colours of the text that's been brought in as part of that. And looking at that, that's generally working pretty well. What we'll do is just make the stencil visible and remove it. And I think looking at it now, the one thing that's standing out is that one orange mark is just far too dominant and distracting. So I think we'll just remove that. And with that, I think we're going to call that one done. So thanks for spending the time watching this. I hope you found that useful and interesting. I hope that gave you some ideas about some of the sorts of things that you can maybe use stencils within Rebelle to do. If you've got any ideas or thoughts on things that you might like to try, I'd love to hear your ideas in the comments below. Otherwise, if you would possibly give us a like. If you're interested in seeing more of this, please subscribe to the channel. And other than that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks, then.